Thank you, thank you. All right, it's 9. If you've just come in and you haven't turned up your exam, please go ahead and put them over here in the stack. All righty. Hopefully that went well for folks. Wanted to take this as a nice little pause to make sure that we are all on the same page about what y'all need to be making sure you're doing. So over the weekend, I caught up on grading and I put in zeros just as placeholders. So if you remember, you have till the end of the semester to finish everything. Yes, on your email, I'll just tell everybody because everyone's gonna have the same question. So you have till the end of the semester to finish everything. I just wanted to give y'all an indication of like, if you didn't go back and do stuff, where your grade would end up. So just as a reminder, I'm pulling up the syllabus here to remind you of all the stuff that you get to do in this class. So anywhere you see EMQ, that's the explain it to the media quizzes. These are really good to do as like review for each chapter. They also translate to those explain it to the media questions you see on your exams. They're right here. One of the things I realized over the weekend, and thanks to I think it was Chandler who emailed me and said like, hey, what's with these due dates? Some of these still had due dates from 2022, which I didn't realize. I thought they didn't have any due dates. So I went through and I put in this semester's due dates so they kind of like populate and you guys can see them. Again, you have till the end of the semester. So even if there's a 0 right now, you can go back and I will replace the 0 with a grade. And so there's one of these for each chapter. They shouldn't take you very long. 15 minutes-ish, something like that. The other thing to be sure that you're doing, I did not go through and put in zeros for these just because it's a little complex how Connect talks to Blackboard and I didn't want to screw it up. But you need to be doing your Connect assignments. If I go through and put in zeros for these at the end of the semester, let me remind myself how much these are worth. I think it's something on the order of 200 points. And so like that's gonna really add up. Yeah, 300 points for the semester out of your 1,000, right? So if you get a 0 on that at the end of the semester, that's gonna be a big chunk. If you're having a hard time financially getting access to Connect, please email me. I can communicate with our rep from McGraw-Hill, and she may be able to either get you a discount or provide some other way for you to access it. They're really good about trying to make sure that students have access, which is great. So make sure you're doing those. The other thing I think that just sort of slides off the radar is the infographic, which is your project for the end of the semester. So the topic for that was due a couple weeks ago. Again, I put in zeros. You can still go ahead and do that and I'll replace the grade. But that was mostly just to like remind you this was a thing. So if you remember, you're choosing a myth in psychology and you're going to make an infographic about it. And so the only thing that's been due so far is your topic or your myth. And it breaks down on the syllabus what you need to turn in for that. It's on Blackboard. So everything for this class, with the exception of the exam, is on Blackboard. So if you look at the infographic here, here's where you can turn in your topic. And then the next thing you have to do, you also turn in here, and that's your outline. And this will include facts, you'll include those examples or descriptions of the types of pictures, graphs, charts, images that you will be including on your infographic. And that is due next week. So this Friday is the 1st. So I believe that's due Monday, the 4th. Again, if you can't get it in by the 4th, I'll give you full points when you turn it in later. The reason I have these checkpoint assignments is so that you don't forget this exists until like the night before. And then you're like, oh, shit, to do that whole thing, right? So this is just kind of like to get you thinking about it. And if you all remember, at the end of the semester during our scheduled exam time, we will be presenting those infographics. And the presentation is literally, you get up here, you pull it up, and you're like, here's my infographic, here's what I talked about. It's like 2 minutes. So if you are scared about presenting, don't be for this presentation. Let me see, let me make sure I'm covering everything. So yeah, make sure you're doing the SBs are the smart book assignments where it kind of walks you through the chapter. Honestly, if you're doing those first, you might not have to go back and read the chapter because it kind of walks you through the whole thing. The Connect assignments are the more interactive ones. A lot of these are about like where things are in the brain or things along those lines. And then the Explain It to the Media quizzes, which are again on Blackboard over here. The other thing to be thinking about for the end of the semester is the psychology experience credits. And so unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of research studies available. I'm trying to get one posted maybe this week or next week, so y'all can participate in that one if you want. But if not, a reminder for these, what you can do is you can just read an article about something in psychology that we've talked about, and then you just write a really short summary answering these 4 questions. I know at least one person has already turned in one of these. They shouldn't take very long. It'll take you longer to read the article than write this up, honestly. And just to show you like a really quick and easy way to find articles in psychology. So if you go to Google Scholar, this is a database that accesses pretty much every published journal, academic journal. And so let's say you wanted to look up something about what we're going to talk about today, which is industrial organizational psychology. It will pull up a whole bunch of references related to that. If the PDF is freely available, it'll be right there. So let's say I was really interested in like cross-cultural industrial organizational psych. I could click on this link. Here's the full text of the article I could read, and then I could answer my assignment about it. So pretty chill there. I think the only other thing I need to tell you about, because I just forgot to tell you about, is and you've got till the end of the semester to turn this one in, is the observational assignment. So this is an application of everything we just talked about in social psych before the exam. And so what you're going to do at some point can be on campus, can be, you know, if you're at the mall or if you're at work and it's slow, right? You're just going to watch people for about 30 minutes and then answer some questions about what you observe. One of my favorites is if anyone notices you observing. So this is under in-class assignments. So right here, and then observation assignment. And again, you have till the end of the semester to turn that in, but I just wanted to actually remind myself to tell you all about doing that. People usually have a lot of fun doing this one. All right, any questions about assignments coming up for the rest of the semester? The reason I wanted to make sure I touch base is that because I was so sick, I didn't get a chance to do midterm progress reports. But I want to remind y'all that you can just look on Blackboard, and that's essentially your midterm progress report. Like that'll tell you what your grade is. Thanks. So just make sure that you are keeping up with things. paying attention to things, and going from there. And at any time, if you have a question, please feel free to grab me before or after class, shoot me an email. I will answer as soon as I can, but again, it might take me those 48 hours, like I said, on the syllabus. So if you email me Monday and I haven't answered by Wednesday, just ask me before or after class because I might have missed it. Any questions about anything? Alrighty. Well, I wanted to very briefly start today by talking about really cool things that you can do as an industrial organizational psychologist. So here's a psychology in the news type article. So this is a industrial organizational psychologist who works for NASA, and part of her job is to do research on what it'll be like for the astronauts who might go on a trip to Mars, right? So I believe it'll take about a year for them to get to Mars. That might be a little bit less. But what is it like to only be around, maybe 3 or 5 other people for that long? What will the effects of that be? How will the crew work as a team to overcome stressors? Strategies for their mental health. So these are really cool applications and examples of how you might be able to combine, like another field like aerospace with psychology. So very cool application. I'm actually going to talk about that with my capstone class today because we're talking about experimental psych. And a lot of people tend to be afraid of research in psychology, I think. And so I'm going to show them some of the cool things you can do with it. So industrial organizational psychology, I'll start with, this is how you make a lot of money as a psychologist. These folks are in governmental organizations. They're often in the private sector working for Fortune 500 companies. Those are the companies that have money to pay the big bucks, right? In academia, I'm not like impoverished, right? But I'm never gonna be making $1 billion. I mean, maybe you wouldn't as an IO psychologist, but you'll certainly be making 3-4 times what I'm making in academia. And so how did we start to get involved in industry, in organizations, in essentially, IO is a fancy term for like job psychology or career psychology. Well, there was a psychologist named Frank Taylor who was really interested in what he called scientific management. So he had this managerial philosophy that if everything was correct and you were supporting your workers properly, then your workers should be like a well-oiled machine. And in order to do that, you need to actually study things. So he was looking particularly at like assembly lines for things. So you want to determine the most efficient methods for performing any work-related tasks. Although he was interested in assembly lines, this certainly could also apply to like office jobs. And then you should have guidelines. Jobs should be carefully analyzed to identify the optimal way to perform them. So the first one is, analyze the job. How do you do it well? The second thing is employees should be hired according to the characteristics associated with success at a task. So you're trying to match your employee with the task, right? Who's going to be best at organizing things? And then maybe be a foreman, right? Who is going to be best at doing this really like fine motor task you have to do? So employee match is really important. The next guideline was that employees should be trained at the job they will perform. This sounds obvious, right? But unfortunately, it's not obvious to a lot of people even today. So give you like a point counterpoint. When I was in high school, I worked retail at Kohl's department store. They put me through, I don't know, something like 12 hours of training, both like behind the scenes and then on the floor. I was very well prepared when I took over that cash register. I became department chair here for my first time in 2016, I believe. And just one day, Dr. Martorell was department chair, and the next day I was department chair. I got no training, I got no guidance from HR. My husband at the same time became a supervisor in his field at the shipyard, and he got 3 months of training. So, and I've heard horror stories of people starting at corporations and not getting any training on the software they use or their methods that they do, right? So again, this seems really obvious. You need to train people to do the job we're gonna do. But a lot of people don't take the time to do this. So training is the third guideline, and then the fourth guideline is you should reward employees for productivity. And that would increase high levels of performance. So maybe they get bonuses if they're very productive. Maybe there's some sort of like system where they can move up the chain, right, and become a supervisor, a VP eventually, right? Again, unfortunately, even though this one seems really obvious, a lot of what's come out since we were in, like working from home from the pandemic is like, this is not done. And in fact, if you're really good at your job, often the reward is you get to do someone else's job too, right? Like you get more work because you're good at it, but not extra pay. And so there's a lot of what we've known for like a century about IO Psych and about how to optimize jobs that's been largely ignored, unfortunately. So again, the 4 guidelines is you should analyze the job to figure out the best way to do it. You should hire employees who match with what that job needs. You should train those employees, again, novel concept. And then you should reward those employees for productivity. So again, he was really interested in particular in assembly lines. He saw those as a prime example of scientific management, and there was this emphasis on time and motion. So a traditional assembly line, if you're not familiar, like things roll down the assembly line, the workers work on them, and they have a set amount of time to do it, right? And so like around this time, Henry Ford created the first assembly line with a moving conveyor. Prior to that, the assembly line workers would move to the car. So this became more efficient. That being said, like assembly lines can have their drawbacks as well. My grandfather worked on the line, actually for Ford Motor Company back in the 50s and 60s. And he, at one point, there were convertibles that had hardtop roofs. So instead of having like a leather roof, it was just like the rest of the car, and they called it a retractable hardtop, and it would go into the trunk. And there were something like 6 or 8 motors to do that. And he had 5 minutes to check all those motors, make sure they were all good, get them all set up before the car rolled through. My grandfather had to medically retire because he had 2 separate heart attacks while working on the line. The beautiful thing is because of unions, he got a pension and like has been fine financially ever since. But other people might not be in that position. So these time and motion studies that Frank Taylor did were to examine the precise movement required to complete a task, and then identify and eliminate unnecessary movements. So again, trying to make things as efficient as possible by just literally what is the optimal movement to do this. He also got really interested in the selection and recruitment of military recruits. And this got really popular in World War I. And this is also sort of how assessment started really being a part of psychology. So they developed these tests in World War I to select folks to be in the Army. They were the Army Alpha and the Army Beta. One was sort of just like a standard test, and the other one was the same thing, but for people who were illiterate. They didn't want to rule out illiterate people being in the military. And then what happened after World War I, and particularly after World War II, is that this moved more into private industry. Another part of industrial organizational psychology, of looking at optimizing the workplace, is ergonomics, or sometimes you'll hear this called human factors psychology. This is the intersection of engineering and psychology. This determines the best way to interact with technology, and it focuses on the safety and efficiency of human-machine interactions. So again, initially, this may have focused on things like, tools you're using on an assembly line, or thinking about automobiles and where's the optimal place to put all the controls. Now, a lot of this is about our pocket technology and our wearable technology. I have a friend who is a human factors engineer, so he works on the engineering side. He works for Fitbit, and so they're always trying to optimize how the technology interacts with the person and make it better. And so psychologists would also be in on that side, thinking about like, how is the best way to kind of like work with the brain to make that happen. And again, still going to be in things like cars, computers, designs of keyboards, things along those lines. But then also thinking about, again, these technologies we interact with the most. And we can think about this as literally building a better mouse. So human factors and ergonomics folks have been involved in things as simple as optimizing a computer mouse. So this is the first ever computer mouse. Very clunky, right? Not that efficient. I use these, and this is really gonna annoy me. I used these in the 80s and early 90s when we were using Apple IIe computers and the first Macs, which were like this box like this. This is more what most people use today, right? I have one of these sitting in my office with my docking station. But true ergonomic mice, might be more formed to the hand, intuitive in terms of how we typically use things, right? And so psychologists and engineers work together to make these things happen. The other thing I should say that psychologists and engineers are involved with ergonomics is also really cool things like medical tech. So like ergonomic or human factor psychologists will work on things like prosthetic limbs and optimizing those. Probably the most famous studies on human factors or industrial organizational psychology were done by a psychologist named Hawthorne in the late 20s to early 30s. And he was really interested in how work conditions influence productivity. And so his very first studies were just changing the lighting. And so, like in some conditions, the lighting would be like this. In some conditions, the lighting would be like this. And what he found is that however he manipulated the lighting, even if it's like this, people worked better. The only exception was if it was this, and it was too dim to actually see. This became known as the Hawthorne effect. And it basically means that productivity increases when workers are singled out and made to feel important. So the workers in Hawthorne studies knew they were being studied, right? They knew the lights were being manipulated, and that made them feel like someone cares. Someone cares enough about what I am doing to try to figure out the way for me to do it best. And therefore, this makes me feel good, and that's going to increase productivity. Now, one of the things you might notice if you know anything about American history, right, is this is also a big overlap with the Great Depression, right? The stock market crash was in 1929. And so there has been some reanalysis of Hawthorne's data, and they suggested that part of the Hawthorne effect at that point in time might be because it was the start of the Great Depression, and people might have been working harder because they wanted to keep their jobs. They needed those jobs to feed their families. They valued those jobs. And also there may have been some changes in personnel at the company that helped. Being said, the Hawthorne effect has been replicated in other studies. This is also around the time that the human relations or HR approach started to come into play. So they were thinking about how do we support people? How do we improve morale? Let's take into account the attitudes and values of the workers. And let's think about how we treat the workers and how we treat managers, right? In general, the Hawthorne effect kind of showed if people are excited and feel valued, they're going to work harder. And then obviously, if you make people feel not valued, not supported, they will work less hard. Again, personal story to support this. I had a really bad experience with Wesleyan during the pandemic. Like someone accused me of endangering the campus community when I had already like isolated for a month because my family had COVID. And after that, I just came to campus only to teach and left because y'all are who I care about. I've gotten better since then. I'm like a little more involved in campus again, but like I didn't feel like putting in the extra mile because they had clearly not valued me. And I know other people who've had similar experiences at many different kinds of jobs. These are, again, a little bit outdated numbers and ideas, but give us some indication of some of the things that workers really like, and workers makes them feel valued, makes them want to keep working at their job. So SAS is a software for statistical analysis, and they have over 5,000 employees. They have unlimited sick days. They provide childcare on their campus, and they have 45% female employees in a tech field. That's pretty unusual. And then 16% minorities. NetApp, a network storage and software company. They offer 10K in adoption aid for people who want to adopt kids. 5 paid days for just volunteering on top of any sick and other leave you have. Not as high, right, in terms of women representation, but great representation of minorities. Some things that Google does is they have on-site fitness centers, again, childcare provided, stock options, things like coffee, and I think now they have like free cafes for their workers. They do tuition reimbursement for folks who want to carry on with their careers. A lot of corporations will do this now. I have a friend who works for the nonprofit LifeNet Health, which works with organ donation, and they pay for her to get a degree. Having their doctors and dentists on site, so it's easy for people to access them. You know, getting more vacation. Wegmans, which we have right down the road near town center. Their company motto is employees first, customer second. And again, you see some of these numbers, half or more than half women. Smuckers, the people who make the jams and jellies. They really stress integrity. They try to have gimmick-free management. Edward Jones is a financial institution. The management is rated as honest by 97% of employees. They have early bonuses in a difficult economic year. The Container Store is a place with really expensive but nice looking storage options. And here you see, both Edward Jones and the Container Store have, 2/3 women, and an emphasis on open communication and employee training. Salaries are 50% higher than the industry average. So these are all places where people said, this is the best place to work. And some of these are the reasons why. And companies have continued to consider these things and give perks and think about optimizing how employees can work. A lot of, I think, really smart companies have allowed employees who started work from home in 2020 to continue work from home if that works best for them. Unfortunately, some companies are making people come back to the office just for the sake of real estate, which is unfortunate. A lot of those companies are losing employees because they're going to places where they can still work from home, right? So now we're going to break down, okay, what does industrial versus organizational psychology mean? And if you're interested in IO Psych, Dr. Jackson teaches a whole course on this. I believe it's every other spring, but don't quote me on that. And so industrial psychology, the emphasis is on how to use human resources. So your available people, your available abilities of your people to increase efficiency and productivity. Some of the topics that people in industrial psychology not only do research on, but also apply in the workplaces are job analysis, employee selection, training, and performance appraisal. And if those sound familiar, they're because they're the 4 guidelines that Frank Turner came up with, right? So figuring out the job and who's going to be the best match, hiring people based on that best match, training them well, and then seeing when they're doing well so you can reward them. So job analysis involves generating a very detailed job description. People who do this well are going to follow a very systematic procedure for any type of job. It could be, what I did, cashier at Kohl's, or it could be our next hire for a professor here at Wesleyan, right? So you're going to break the job into small units, create an employee manual for that job, and then you are going to create this description oriented around the job itself. Focus on the job itself, job oriented, rather than being like, do you ever read job ads? Some of them are really abstract. This is a great corporation and everyone should work for us. And you're like, okay, but what would I do if I worked there, right? Ideally, you should know just by reading that job ad. They also talk about person-oriented descriptions. So you want to think about what knowledge does someone who will be good at this job need, right? Do they need previous experience? Do they need a specific type of college degree, right? If you're going to be working in a biotech lab, you should probably have a degree in biology, chemistry, something along those lines, right? So you know basic concepts about cells and DNA and all that stuff, right? What skills do they need to do this job, right? And again, these can be very specific. They need to know and understand how to use our cash register system. They need to know and understand how to synthesize compounds. Maybe it's a managerial position. They need to know and understand how to talk to people, how to have emotional intelligence, how to work with a team, right? So these can vary. Abilities. These are things that might be more innate. So some job, let's say you're working for UPS, you need to be able to get a license to drive one of those trucks. I'm not sure if you need a CDL or if they're small enough, you don't. But you need to be able to operate one of those trucks. You need to be able to pick up probably 50 plus pounds, right? And you need to be able to kind of keep a pace going all day because it goes pretty quickly. And then think about what other characteristics might we need for this particular job. In terms of employee selection, there's a lot of really interesting debate within psychology, within corporations, about the use of testing for employee selection. So some people will do personality testing. Some people will do ability type testing. Some people will do integrity tests, like what are your morals and values? A lot of what has happened, unfortunately, in the past 10 years or so, is that this testing ends up becoming free labor. So like people applying for, I don't know, like a sales position might be like given a problem to solve or a potential client and then create a presentation or here's some data, analyze it. And that's part of the interview process and you don't get paid to do that. And you've been doing this stuff for 3 months for them and then they're like, oops, sorry, we hired someone else. In my mind, that's really unethical, right? So there's a lot of debate about that, but the companies who are doing it argue we need to do this to see if they can do the job. Is there a happy medium? Probably. Sometimes these tests are really almost silly. When I applied to work at Kohl's, I had to take a test that was like, I like multitasking. And I was like, well, clearly you want me to say yes to that, right? Like it's pretty obvious. But some of them can be really important. So for example, let's say we are hiring for a very specific job that's going to be in the public sector, and put the public at risk potentially if we don't hire the right person. So let's say we're hiring a firefighter, a police officer, someone along those lines. A lot of times those folks will be contingently hired. We're going to hire you, but then you have to go through our testing process. And they will be given a full psychological evaluation. Do an interview, do this test called the MMPI that measures personality and other things to make sure we're not giving a psychopath a license to go out with a gun on the streets, right? Or to run into fires and not save people. And so those are really valuable. But as you notice, I said you're contingently hired. So those people do get paid for going through that. And good companies should pay you for training, which we'll talk about next as well. Interviews are another thing that we study and try to give best practices for within industrial psychology. So we want to avoid things like interviewer illusion. This is interviewers' mistaken tendency to believe that I have the ability to just discern the truth from a job applicant. The problem is, this is really hard to do because the job applicants are putting their best foot forward. Sometimes they might be lying, right, to make themselves look better. And other times they're just only mentioning the good things about themselves, right? So no one is good at that because you're combating someone else presenting themselves in the best light. We also might create what are called structured interviews. And this is where the interviewer is given specific questions particular to that job that they ask every single person they interview. This allows a like one-to-one comparison and how they respond. This also avoids bias slipping through in interviews. So for an example, you tell me about a time you've had a conflict with someone and how you worked it out. There are a lot of illegal questions you're not supposed to ask during interviews, but interviewers will ask. And they'll ask it in sneaky ways. So you're not supposed to ask about someone's marital status, right? But people will be like, oh, well, what about your spouse? What will they do if you move here? Needling, right? Or if someone with a uterus goes for a job interview, do you anticipate having to take time off in the future? They're trying to get at, are you going to become pregnant, right? And you're not legally allowed to ask those things. And so having structured interviews not only allows you to compare directly, but also protects your company from a lawsuit if you have sort of a rapid fire interviewer. What I mentioned before would be under the auspices of work samples and mock tasks. Again, if you're like bringing someone in for one day and you have them do something short, that's fine. So when we hire faculty, they have to come on campus and do what we call a job talk. It's like a sample lecture, because teaching is such an important part of what we do here. That might not be the case at a bigger university, right, where they're going to be dedicating more time to research. And they know that that's just going to be part of the interview, and they can create one job talk they use for all their interviews. Mock tasks, again, might be making someone analyze data, something along those lines. And again, if these are minimal, they're fine. If they stretch out and you're basically having people do unpaid labor, that's problematic. Now for training. One of the most important things about onboarding someone is the orientation. A good orientation is going to not only teach the person about what they need to know about their job, but also about the organization, the company, and its regulations, its practices. So if there's a dress code, you might learn that during the orientation, right? Things along those lines. There's been some research about computer versus in-person orientations. In person, maybe not shockingly, tends to be better, or at least like over Zoom. So you have that interaction. Computer ones can do okay, but if anyone's ever sat through a lot of like voice over PowerPoint slides for orientation or something, you know your mind just wanders, right? And then you, again, if we go back to Turner, you want to have formal training. And a lot of times, particularly if you're doing a manual task, they want to do what's called overlearning to make that task automatic. So I mentioned my husband works at the shipyard. He started as a radiological technician. They're the people who fuel the submarines. And if you don't know, the submarines are nuclear. So they're working with nuclear power and nuclear waste. They train for months before they even go in and like start working on the reactor. Because the idea is to overtrain, make that task automatic, eliminate any possibility that there be any kind of nuclear accident, right? You also want to make sure you have ongoing employee development. Refresher courses. If something new comes in, giving them training. And again, doing that well. I swear Wesleyan is a great place to work. I just like, these are the examples I have. So we have a new system for finances and the business office called Oracle. Apparently this is a software package that's fantastic. A bunch of Fortune 500 companies use it. Unfortunately, when we got access to it, people like messed it up. People who didn't really know what they were doing, probably didn't have proper training on the software, program things in a really weird way. So we've had this software for over a year, and we've been asking, please give us training, please give us training. Last Thursday at noon, there was supposed to be a training about Oracle, and about 30 faculty showed up, and no one showed up to do the training. And then they like track someone down and like, what's supposed to happen? And it was supposed to be like a virtual training with someone from the company that makes the software. And he came on and he had no training agenda. He was like, what do you guys want to know? And apparently one of the faculty members said, how to use Oracle. That's not a good example, right? Ongoing employee development should be things like, let's do a refresher on safety issues. We do that every year with Title IX issues as faculty and staff here. Or a lot of faculty within our fields are required to keep up with training and cutting edge knowledge within our field. So in a couple of weeks, I'll be going to a conference. Y'all will have a day off. And I go to that conference so that I can like learn about the new therapy techniques, make sure I'm up to date on those when I teach about therapies. And that can be really important. Mentoring is another really important thing. And that's a relationship between an experienced employee and then a newer employee to support the newer person. And mentorship can be formal. So in some places you're assigned a mentor. Here at Wesleyan, one of the things I really like that we do well, I think, is you have a mentoring committee of 2 to 3 faculty members who have been here for a while to guide you, and you get to pick them. And then sometimes it's just really informal. So for example, there might just be someone that you get to know at work who's been there for a while. And you realize this person has a lot of knowledge. This person would be someone good to go to if I have questions. And then you shoot them an email or you have coffee and you talk things over. Mentoring can be really useful. How about performance appraisal? How do we determine whether someone is actually doing their job properly? Well, one of the things we need to be careful of is there is a potential bias called the halo effect, which is if we feel like an employee is great, it's like they have one of those like Renaissance painting halos over their head, right? With the saints or Jesus, right? And so we just rate them highly on everything, even if there's an area they might be a little more weak in. And that doesn't benefit the employee because then they don't know where they need to grow and get better. One of the things that they've developed is what's called 360-degree feedback, where you can collect evaluations of the employee from numerous different sources. So you would get obviously like their supervisor eval, but also their coworker eval. If they're supervising anyone, you'd get their supervisee evals. If you're in a situation where you're doing customer service work, you get customer satisfaction ratings. And you incorporate all of those into your analysis rather than just focusing on one source. And once you have those variabilities, nothing important. Once you have that variability, then those ratings reflect performance. How's that person actually doing, rather than a general halo effect type impression. So 360-degree feedback, again, you would, what I forgot to say is you also self-eval. How am I doing? What's my reflection? Clients or customers, subordinates, your supervisors, your peers, coworkers, people who are on the same level as you. All of those things are evaluating your performance, and that goes into your performance evaluation. And again, ideally, you want to then reward people who are doing well with promotions, raises, right? Additional benefits. How do you make these seem more fair? Having a face-to-face meeting to talk about the performance appraisal rather than just shooting someone an email. Makes the person understand it more, makes them feel more supported. That self-evaluation we just talked about becomes really important because then the employee feels like they can contribute to it. The people who are rating should be trained in that rating form. So we shouldn't just like send it out. We should have training on here's how you evaluate people, and here's what, let's say it's a 5-point scale. Here's what a 3 means versus a 4. Again, multiple raters makes people feel like it's more fair. A big thing is not just criticizing them, you're doing this wrong, but giving them opportunities to improve. Here's our suggestions for how to improve what you're doing. Here's a training that might be really good, or you and I can sit down once a week and talk about how this is going. And then having an appeal process. Let's say you're the employee and you don't agree with your evaluation. Having the ability to formally lodge a complaint, maybe have it reviewed by someone higher up and see if there might be, even with all these other things, might still be some bias. All right, we will end there for today, and we'll start talking about organizational psych on Wednesday. If you didn't turn in your exam yet, add it to the pile, and we're good to go.